weakness in that jobs data, it's all of a sudden going to put the Fed in a much different position, and that will likely weaken the dollar. So I think the key is understanding for everyone that if the world crumbles, meaning that if China crumbles because their real estate market's crumbling, if Europe crumbles because of natural gas and Russia, basically what's going on is people will flood into the dollar. People are over anticipating that. And my guess is, number one, we've heard that China's already cutting interest rates multiple times. They're stimulating their economy. My guess is, again, we're going to see natural gas. I have a key level on natural gas that shows it's likely going to top out. I think people are actually over anticipating these events. And when it comes and when it doesn't come to fruition, that's going to be also a trigger for the dollar.
In light of the current circumstances, where the dollar is surging and individuals are interested, how may the ongoing downturn affect the Fed's position in Bitcoin right now?
I think number one, the Fed minutes that came out last week, the market was a little shocked the Fed wasn't more dovish. They seemed very, very hawkish, and that's really where we topped out in the equity markets. We've seen that pull back now. We've pretty big sharp down days Friday and today. And now the question is, again, where do we go? I think for Bitcoin itself is kind of trying to figure that out as well. And in fact, we can go to the Bitcoin chart here. Let me bring that up so we can take a look. But basically, we broke down below this channel. So this was a bearish kind of channel, perfectly parallel lower line and upper line. And you can see on Friday when we had the big market sell-off, it did break. So that's a little bit of a concern. It's not the end all though, because you're still holding above the 2017 highs. So this is going to be a big test now for Bitcoin. Does Bitcoin come down? Does it tag it and bounce? Or do we start to break lower? And again, for that, you have to look at the DXY. I think the dollar is hugely important here. The dollar has been screaming to the upside. I do have it penciled in that we have a nice double top here, so I expect a pullback in the dollar, and that may save Bitcoin in the near term.
With the Bitcoin significant drop and the dollar on the blast now, did Gareth see this as a prolonged and drawn-out market position? Or did he believe it will persist until perhaps the end of August or the beginning of September?
I think for me, at least when it comes to Bitcoin, it still has a small chance to make one more push up. It almost seems too easy. I'm a kind of a contrarian trader where we've broken down. The Bitcoin chart never really had a big spike that got everyone on board on the bullish side. A lot of people were bullish, but not to the extent that usually signals a reversal in trend. I am kind of curious, if we look at the Bitcoin's price today, it's only down a little bit. In fact, the equity markets are down percentage-wise more than Bitcoin, which is somewhat on the rarer side, especially when the dollar is as strong as it is. So I don't know if we can look at that right now and say, well, that's actually a strong indicator for Bitcoin, but it very well could stick maybe a little bit of upside still left in Bitcoin's tank before it finally rolls over. So I think it's important to understand, I'm not debating whether or not Bitcoin's going to go lower. I do believe it does. The question is when. And that's going to be key here. Do we get one more push up, retest 25, maybe get to 28, or is it done now and just going to that 12 to 13,000 range?
If we hold the dollar right now at where it has been charting, how does Gareth think Bitcoin performs?
I like to go to my weekly chart and zoom out a little bit. And I still think that for the dollar to only have pulled back as much as it did and then retest and break out, it doesn't seem likely because these two trend lines are so powerful. So if anything, I'm looking at this as more of a double top, at least in the near term, that should push the dollar back down. Now, you might say, what's the catalyst for the dollar to pull back? Well, what about the jobs number coming, lagging indicator? We know that some of the economic data is already kind of weakening, but the jobs data has been so strong that everyone's saying, well, the Fed has to keep tightening because they can with the jobs data. But if you see some weakness in that jobs data, it's all of a sudden going to put the Fed in a much different position, and that will likely weaken the dollar.
For Gareth, what will happen to the dollar and Bitcoin as a result of the global economic catastrophe that is erupting?
I think the key is understanding for everyone that if the world crumbles, meaning that if China crumbles because their real estate market's crumbling, if Europe crumbles because of natural gas and Russia, basically what's going on is people will flood into the dollar. People are over anticipating that. And my guess is, number one, we've heard that China's already cutting interest rates multiple times. They're stimulating their economy. My guess is, again, we're going to see natural gas. I have a key level on natural gas that shows it's likely going to top out. I think people are actually over anticipating these events. And when it comes and when it doesn't come to fruition, that's going to be also a trigger for the dollar.
Assuming that the dollar's recent rally has already been priced in, did Gareth think it will break through and affect digital assets soon?
Just to be fair, there's always chances of small overshoots. So is it possible we could pierce that double top for a couple days, a week? Yes. But I don't think it's going to last because, again, everything I'm seeing is showing a weakening economy. I'm noticing retailers are starting to show. We've seen a lot of retailers reporting earnings. We did see Walmart rally, but then Target fell sharply on their report. And we're seeing more weakness coming out. And I do think that jobs number will showcase that there is weakening going on. And people will start saying, okay, maybe the Fed in September hikes 25 basis points, but it's probably not going to be 50 or 75. The question is, by November, December, is it even the Fed hiking anymore without pushing us into a recession? Without inflation back below 2%, they have to be so careful not to push us into recession because what can they do? I mean, if they put us in a tailspin, they can't bail us out again with printing of money unless inflation is down to 2%, which it is absolutely not going back to for a long time.
What were Gareth's thoughts on Ethereum over the next 30 years?
Ethereum is one of the trickier charts for me to analyze, mainly because of the curveball of the merge and how that affects price. I'm a true believer that the reason Ethereum has rallied, I mean, if you look at the rally, it was up over 100% off of the lows. My guess is a chunk of that gain was due to the excitement of the merge. My fear is that it's going to be a sell the news event. It's going to happen. Yes, it's a good thing for Ethereum, but I don't necessarily know if it's a short-term continued catalyst. I think you could get some bounces here, but I wouldn't be surprised if you have to go at least retest 1250 down here, which would be major support before it has a chance to kind of withstand the selling pressure that the U.S. markets are likely to exude. I'm in that camp where I still think there's a little bit more downside. I still think Bitcoin has further downside, and therefore, by default, probably Ethereum. The question for me is, has Ethereum put in its longer-term low already, which, again, I'm a little bit murky on. Yeah, so for me, I have to wait. You know, anytime something rallies as much as the Ethereum chart has rallied, I would be too scared or too nervous to jump in at this minor of a pullback. I mean, we're basically down 30% or so off of those highs maybe, but it's not a huge correction. Usually what you'll see is after you have such a big bear market drop in Ethereum, and again, if we go back, this was trading near 5,000, it went to 875 or so before this bounce back. Usually you'll get a check back.
Did Gareth think S&P could drag down Bitcoin or Ethereum just because of earnings numbers coming back negatively?
We have to respect the risk side of the stock market and its impact on the crypto market. I do think that earnings estimates have to come down more. Everything I'm seeing right now, they haven't come down very much at this point. So if the economy is going to start to show more weakness, then those stocks are going to have to adjust down to keep their status with their PE ratios. Where if you see another 10, 20, 30% downside on the NASDAQ, maybe 20% on the S&P, then by default, it will drag down cryptocurrencies. But I'm curious for cryptocurrencies, and this could be a big bullish catalyst. Do we get some form of clarity on what kind of restrictions or what kind of rules Ethereum and the altcoins are going to have as securities? But interestingly enough, clarity is what the market craves. And when you get clarity, even if it's bad initially, I believe the market will actually embrace it after an initial sell-off. So you might see it panic, right? You might see that big dip down. It's almost worth kind of throwing out some orders at ridiculously low levels, because if we get that, it sells hard, and then all of a sudden people say, wait a minute, now we know what this means. We know it. So now we can value these things. And I think, again, that could be a bottom in the crypto market.
What action should the politician take to establish Bitcoin?
I would just look at it as long-term Bitcoin is amazing, then use it as a buying opportunity. And the other thing I'd like to point out, is there going to be regulation? What type of regulation? Is it going to be bad regulation? I would like to make the point that I hear a lot more of the politicians getting involved with Bitcoin and buying it as an investment. And this is what's crazy is they're involved with the dollar and what's going on in the spending in the government. And therefore, they almost know deep down that the dollar's long-term in trouble, and they're diversifying with Bitcoin. So they're not going to actually want Bitcoin to survive and thrive when they have investments in it. I think the Bitcoin regulation overall will be fine.
Considering the current state of Ethereum, did Gareth anticipate a further decline?
I do think that Ethereum has a little bit more downside to go, probably to around that 1,250 level, according to the charts. Basically, you just have to see a little bit of a washout. In fact, the last 3 days, you could even argue that we're starting to see a little bear flag forming, which dictates a slight negative bias there. So if you're going to get a big bounce, you want to see that retrace. And in fact, I haven't done a Fibonacci retrace on it, but in fact, I can show my chart here and we can do it. So if we take this low here and we go up to the high, basically you're looking at about more than a 618 Fibonacci retrace to get back down to 1200 and change on that. So right in that lower range.
If Gareth is playing and had a hold on both Ethereum and Bitcoin, which did he believe has the greater long-term upside potential?
That's a good question. I feel more comfortable being in Bitcoin right now. So if you had a portfolio and 100,000, how much do you put in Bitcoin? How much do you put in Ethereum? Assuming you had to be fully invested, I would probably do 65% Bitcoin, 35% Ethereum, mainly because you have to look at the risks and there's more risks. We know that Gensler basically Bitcoin's a commodity. We know that it's Ethereum. We have to figure out how that's going to all play out. And that is an added risk. So you have to factor that into your allocation in your portfolio. And just to be clear, like in terms of long term, I love Ethereum. I love Bitcoin. I'm not sold on any other cryptos yet because I think there's too much jockeying for those next few spots. And you have to be careful about that. I mean, we could see Solana emerge as a leader. We could see Avalanche. We could see any of these, but there's no guarantees. And if you look a year ago at what was in the top 10 or the top 15, a lot of those are no longer there, and that has to be factored in as well. But you know what's always been number one and number two? Ethereum and Bitcoin, right? So I think you just want to be careful about that as investors.